Thank you for watching the VIFF Short Forum, program number 3. This is the Vancouver International Film Festival's 40th edition. My name is Curtis Woloschuk. I'm the Associate Director of Programming at the festival, and I'm very excited to be joined by some of the filmmakers responsible for the work you've just seen. From Together, we have Albert Shin. From Flower Boy, we have Anya Chirkova and Khatam. And from Srikandi, we have Andrea, Nirmala, Widjajanto. Thank you all for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
And I wanted to begin with Albert. You were at our festival a few years ago with The Disappearance at Clifton Hill, back when it was a little film just called Clifton Hill, much more concise. But there was a kind of neon noir set in Niagara Falls, a sprawling ensemble cast of various kind of rogues, and a lot of stylized dialogue in it. This obviously a much more spare film. Very, very formally controlled, and wondering for yourself whether it was a reaction to Clifton Hill in some respect, or what really kind of drove you down this path to make it Together.
Good question. Actually, interestingly enough, I actually shot this pre-Clifton Hill, but it took. It was actually, I did it almost as something as a primer to Clifton, even though they're very, very different movies. So I shot it, and then because I jumped right into the feature, I actually never got a chance to really work on it. And so I kind of put it off to the side, and then it was kind of this, weight hanging over my shoulder, just being like, oh, I gotta get this short. I really liked it, and I thought there was something there, but I wasn't quite sure. So it took kind of the pandemic for me to actually kind of unpack everything and kind of look at it and really kind of shape it and sculpt it. But yeah, it was sort of, in some ways, I like to zig and zag for sure. This is obviously, a universe away from Clifton Hill. But I think it was kind of purposely, I think for myself, I just like to kind of stay on my toes a little bit and not try to get too comfortable with subject matter or styles. But sort of the inspiration for this was just when I was making this feature film called Inner Place, which is a Korean language movie, 7-8 years ago, I came upon this idea of suicide pacts, where strangers would get together in motel rooms and commit suicide together. And it just kind of was very, very fascinating and kind of strange and haunting, but kind of beautiful and, weirdly life affirming, while obviously it's about ending your life. So I just wanted to kind of figure out a way to explore that, but not trivialize it or sensationalize it. And it was kind of a strange needle to thread. And it kind of did take the whole pandemic for me to kind of crack the code, actually. So I'm kind of, not grateful for the pandemic, but the pandemic is definitely the reason why this movie exists right now. So
that's right. Mind your words, please. But appreciate how it feels a film that could have taken some time to kind of fall into place. And how maybe divergent is it from what you had on paper and maybe previous iterations of it that you were cutting, leading into Clifton Hill or over the years, this finished film that people have seen now?
Yeah, it's for me, for people, now, for people that see it, it's, it's a very, on the surface, a very simple movie. It's the simplest movie I've ever made in a lot of respect. However, it was deceptively complex to pull off. And, we shot a lot. We had, there's probably a 30-40 minute version of this movie. And probably the first cut was probably close to that. And it really was sort of addition by subtraction. It was just trying to see how much was too much. And if you gave a little bit, then it almost felt like you needed to give more. Whereas if you started taking away, it sort of felt like it's a blank canvas that's more interesting for, the audience to project, onto like themselves onto the characters. So it was kind of a balance to, how much is too much, how much is too little. And it was a little bit of the whole thing was calibration and modulation. And it was hard to know. It was really hard to know, if I had anything or if this was just absolutely nothing. It was just, I was kind of in a vacuum a little bit. So, but yeah, I was really happy with where it got to, and it was sort of the barest bone version of the movie that kind of, I think, resonated for me, and hopefully it does for other people.
Andrea, for yourself, I'm curious to know, were you drawn to the Srikandi story itself initially, or was it the the shadow puppetry? Like, how did kind of these elements of your film coalesce into what we've seen?
It was started with the shadow puppet story because I knew I wanted to do a story about shadow puppets. It was originally like a project for school, but I never actually really finished it. But I knew I wanted to recreate that story, so I made it in a much more bigger scale than film school, but it still is not as big. But I knew I had the idea of I wanted the young girl to be possessed by the father, but the whole plan was I was trying to figure out what story would I like to tell during the performance scene. And I figured out that I wanted it to be Srikandi because it was a rare story in the shadow puppet world, because there's not a lot of female characters in the shadow puppet world, but this was one that I was really drawn to, and I wanted to showcase like a female warrior. But it didn't really work out because our shadow puppeteer didn't have characters for Srikandi, but it was too late because I fell in love with the story of Srikandi already. So what I did was it actually inspired me of like, oh, I could actually make the film itself like a modern interpretation of the Srikandi story. And then that created another layer of depth that the story actually needed. And yeah, I think that's how it came along.
I really love that sentiment that it was too late to turn back, because you just fallen in love with it too much. And it's a film that like clocks in at under 10 minutes, and yet it has this like wonderfully complex structure to it, and unfolds in these various worlds or levels as well. And you mentioned that it started in film school and then continued on after that point. Was it a film that you needed to kind of get right on the page first, like kind of have the script really thought through or storyboarded as well? Or did you have room to kind of experiment and play once you started shooting it?
I didn't really have time. I didn't really have a lot of time to prep, because the film was actually made for a competition. It was a competition for Vancouver Asian Film Festival. They have this yearly short film competition called Mighty Asian Movie Making Marathon. And it was in the middle of the pandemic, and I just wanted to make a movie during the summer. And I was like, okay, this is a fun one that I can do in 5 minutes. So I wrote a 5-page script, and that one is actually one of the scripts that I found like was very fast for me to write compared to all of my other scripts, because usually I'm a slow writer. But this one actually came pretty fast, and because we had to write, shoot, and edit in 3 weeks, I didn't really have time to prep. Like, I had to choose whether I wanted to prep more or I wanted more time in post, and I chose more time in post. So I didn't really have much time to think about the script so much, about like which ones I want to change. I just worked on it every day, and and then changed it a bit just based on the locations we got. But no, like I feel like everything was, I really planned it out in the script, but it was the dancing part that I allowed it for more experimentation during the shoot, because there's really no planning that. Like, we assembled the dancing scene in post.
It's a remarkable accomplishment in the period of time you had to make it. Congratulations. So if I understand correctly, both Albert and Andrea can thank the pandemic for their films in some respect or another. Anya and Maz, can you follow through on that as well?
I wouldn't call Flower Boys a pandemic movie, but definitely the editing happened during the lockdown, and it was the first time, I guess, for us discovering what it's like to, edit the picture and the sound online over Zoom, and like barely actually meeting in person. So that was probably one of the biggest challenges pandemic-wise. So I would say, yeah. What do you think?
It would have been a movie that would be impossible to shoot during the pandemic, because it's a very intimate film. And like in it, like I have scenes in it that are like with the other actress, Andrea, that it would be impossible to shoot. We had a house party scene with a bunch of extras. Some of our friends were there. that would be impossible to shoot. It's funny because when you watch it during the pandemic, it feels so refreshing to watch it, because I feel like it's something that people miss almost, because it's such a intimate film. It's so it's physically intimate as well, and I think it's something that was taken away from us during the pandemic. And so then, yeah, during the post-production, all the sound work, and I think some of the color stuff we had to do.
A lot of the picture editing was.
A lot of the picture editing was done during the pandemic. So we had to actually pause the film, because I remember it was March. We were doing ADR for the movie. I remember actually specifically, it was during ADR. One of the actors was like, "Oh, did you hear about this thing, COVID?" I had no clue what it was.
We're like, whatever, it's gonna pass. It's not a big deal.
Literally, like the next day, we couldn't meet with anybody, and then we basically just started doing the film remotely. We paused for a little bit, and then places started opening up. I believe after maybe 6 months or something, places started opening up in Toronto. And luckily we found a place, like a studio, that we could do our final mix in. But COVID ruined things for us. And we planned to finish the film a lot earlier. And
unfortunately it happened what happened. So I'm glad that we're here. But originally we planned to finish it a little bit earlier. So
there is this element of nostalgia to the film when you watch it. And I think it's when, it maybe was intended even when you were making it initially, but it does feel like a bit of a time capsule from an era that is like chronologically not far in the past, and yet socially feels like it exists at a great remove as well. So I think the film actually amasses kind of more weight to it as well, because of the fact that immediately in the wake of it having been made, these things are suddenly no longer open to us. And I'm just curious if you found your relationship, like maybe with the tone of the film, changing as you were seeing it through post-production, as circumstances changed.
Absolutely. I would say during the edit, the film got shaped slightly different from what I originally saw it, and how the script was and how we shot it. So partially was just simply because of what the footage was like. That's just how it always is. But I think going back to the topic of the pandemic, definitely it affected one way or another, because we were longing for connection and because we wanted to go back to the past, I guess, so badly, right? It definitely added that extra element of longing of something that we can't have anymore.
Yeah. And I would say it changed it in the fact that like we had to pause the film, and so pausing it, we didn't watch the film during that time. And then like rewatching it, we actually changed our ending quite a bit. Like the original end of the film is kind of like maybe depressing, for lack of a better word, or like kind of more like it's less hopeful. Like in the end, his life is just kind of like just sucks really. But then we kind of were like, oh, let's reshape it a little bit to give a little bit of hope, and also that kind of potential ending for like his life might actually end up not great. Like he's in this laser quest. He's kind of given up on his dream a little bit. The character of the girl, she left, and he's with this old guy who's just like a stoner, and this is kind of not the best life for him. He could potentially get trapped in this. And the original ending kind of ended there. It just gave us like one ending. And then through that pause, we kind of like with our editor and like talking to people, showing it to people during the pandemic.
We found a bit of hope, I guess, in the light of the editing and how the world stayed going on. So because it's a short film and you have a certain timeline that you have to hit, or at least you that's what you aim for. Pandemic in a way gave us a little bit more time to find, in my opinion, a better end to it. But in general.
And luckily we didn't have to reshoot anything for that new ending. We shot so much. We shot so much. We had enough footage for maybe a 30-minute movie or something. Really, we cut a lot of scenes. We started a lot of scenes in the middle of certain scenes. Like we're like, oh, we don't need any of this. We changed a little bit of the beginning, through talking to people and showing friends. And so just that pause was really actually in a way, maybe the pandemic did help. Maybe I'll go back on, because it did really shape the movie to what we have now, and we really do like what we have now. And we probably wouldn't have it if it wasn't for that pause with the quarantine and stuff. So yeah.
I think all three films we're discussing have the rhythms of the editing are so essential to them as well. And I was thinking with Flower Boy, there's almost like an elliptical sort of feel to it, where you feel that you're, as you said, coming in partway through or exiting before you think you would, and the rhythms kind of allow this off-kilter nature of the film to really take hold of you. And I think it's there's a musical quality to it as well, which is very compelling. The Albert, for yourself, you had mentioned how you were kind of haunted or continued fixated with the stories of these charcoal, like it's inhalation deaths in this case, which I had to do some Googling for to determine exactly what we had witnessed. But and then the strangers, so the strangers who engage in pacts like this. And you did talk a little bit about, stripping back information, but wondering, how maybe either in earlier iterations of the film or in the script or conversations with your two actors, you established the background for these two people who found themselves at, the potential end of their worlds together, and gave them enough to work with in the room to really, bring their own characters' lived experiences to this space.
Yeah. So yeah, a lot of the stuff that kind of didn't make it, but even, we did a lot of, stuff that we shot that we knew wasn't really for the movie, but maybe it was just sort of workshopping these characters, just trying to find ways for them to embody them without, long soliloquies or speeches where they talk about their problems or anything like that. We never went down those roads, but, we did, the original version of the film, we spent a lot more time with the female character before our second man character shows up. And then once they did show up, there was a little bit more interaction, which, we played with sort of the awkwardness of, them being strangers and all this kind of stuff, which was in a vacuum, like really nice scenes. And, the actors really kind of, bared themselves and, looking at them, it was kind of hard to let go until when you kind of pull back and realize as a whole, it maybe was not the right, it just wasn't pitched at the right thing that we were trying to go for. But all of this was sort of in service of trying to create a subjective idea of, these two people are strangers that are meeting each other for the first time. And, they know about as much about each other as we do as an audience, and just trying to create that feeling of being kind of like a third fly on the wall there. And, how awkward and strange it must be. But, even through all of that, and with a certain resolve to end your life, there is still kind of, the potential for hope in some ways without getting hokey. That was another thing to try to, for me anyways, for this film, was trying to circumvent getting away from it being a little too, hokey or pandering to something, what I mean? So it was really, really, it was just kind of a very thin line to walk. And it took until like a month or two ago for me to really figure out how to do it. And then went through that, it is a very kind of quiet film. So just how do I utilize sound without being overly kind of artificial, but how do I make little creaks and the sound of something scraping against a table kind of mean something a little bit more without, explicitly drawing attention to it. So all of that kind of stuff was kind of the fun stuff that you were hoping has a cumulative effect, because, on their own, they might just be like little details that don't mean anything. But obviously, if when it works, like all that stuff kind of gathers a power, hopefully for the, as it goes along, and gathers some sort of a potency. So that was sort of the goal in 12 minutes. But yeah, so it did take a while, and it did require a great deal of trust from the actors to kind of go to different places, even if they knew most of this stuff was just actually for each other or for themselves, just to kind of figure themselves out in this room and get comfortable as actors, but also comfortable as their time together, goes through. So, yeah.
Andrea, for yourself, your film really hinges upon these family dynamics, and I was wondering, was there a particular character amongst the players on screen that was a challenge for you to find your way into as a writer, or or how much of that was conversations with the actors you eventually cast to really bring those characters to life?
No, I think it was very necessary for me to have both genders from the parents represented, because it is such a story that brings up the differences in how Indonesia treats these genders. But it's also creating an interesting dynamic because the daughter relates more to the father in terms of her interests and also her personality. There wasn't really a lot of chances that I got with working with the actors, because both of the parents were non-actors. And it was very hard. Maybe I brought this upon myself, but it was very hard to find Indonesian speaking actors in Vancouver. So the dad had, and especially the dad had to be really fluent in Javanese, and also was a shadow puppeteer. So, and there was only one shadow puppeteer in Vancouver, so it had to be him. And yeah, it was mostly just working the dialogue. And I had this one rule of just like, if a dialogue feels too stilted and it doesn't come off naturally, don't feel like you have to be attached to the script. As long as you feel that it's still conveying the same subject matter and still evoking the same emotion, I don't mind if you change it a little bit. So don't feel constrained to dialogue. But no, I felt like I wanted that family dynamic came through both in the script and in the screen. I didn't really have trouble with any of them.
It's quite the casting challenge you assigned yourself when there's only one person in the entire city who can play that character.
Yeah.
So it's fortunate that it worked out. Congratulations.
Yeah. It all got very lucky too, and I think I had to hide a lot of it too, because I couldn't find an Indonesian woman of that age. And the woman who actually played it, like, she was in her 70s, but she looked really good for her age. So she played off as the mom. Yeah.
And for Anya and Maz, it's a surprisingly like physical role that is demanded of you. You get like picked up, you get thrown around, and I appreciate your gameness in it, and you seemed up for any challenge that was presented to you. But is that just a way of you finding your way into the character and like just engaging with them on this really physical level and making yourself comfortable in that gangly skin?
I appreciate your efforts putting into it as well.
I mean, okay, listen, like, I'm not an actor, and Anya had to do some convincing because we worked on the script. I think initially I was just supposed to be like a producer, just the writer, like just to help out. And then through writing it, he was like, you could play him, like, because a lot of it is like the stuff like with the fence where he rips his pants. Like, I still have a photo of my friend doing that. The scene where he plays the spoon guitar. My friend taught me that for 3 months. I don't know how to play anything. And so that was just 3 months of learning a guitar and a spoon and just playing. And then the ukulele was another maybe month. And then the drum machine I had to learn and all of that. The music part, I still have nightmares over it. Like, it was, and especially when the crew is watching you and it's like 3 a.m. and you're doing like and you got to nail it. You have to nail it. Like, there's no other way, you know what I mean? And so the music part was the most challenging thing. Like, I guess physically. And then the intimate stuff was, I guess, maybe scary at first, but I was so comfortable with Andrea and working with Anya. We rehearsed a lot of the film. I would say we rehearsed it maybe for three weeks, maybe a little bit more.
We rehearsed the film, but also that aside, 3 of us, Maziyar, Andrea, and me, we spend a lot of time with each other, just simply going out, hanging out, drinking coffee, going on the beach. And my goal was to make sure that they're comfortable with one another, because I found Andrea specifically for this project, and I knew Maz beforehand. We went to school together, but the point being is none of us knew each other really, really well. And I think for me, the most important part, aside the rehearsal, was to make sure that they're comfortable with one another in the room and there is no awkwardness. There's no like awkward silence between them. And if it is silence, it should be comfortable for both of them. And I think my main goal was to achieve that. So
I mean, there was definitely a little bit of awkwardness, but we used that in the film because I think if we were too comfortable with each other, I don't know if it would have played out, because I was definitely intimidated that, you know, she has a lot of acting credits. She's a great actress. And so like, I was like, who the hell am I to do this? You know what I mean? I didn't feel like an actor. And so I try to use as much of that as I could, because that's the character kind of feels like that in his way, because the film is basically about two artists. Like, she's a painter and he's a musician, and he kind of feels that way when he sees the painting. And so I used as much of that as I could, because I was like, what am I doing here? Like, what's, you know what I mean? Like, I had that throughout the entire shoot, really, just that kind of feeling. And so Anya was great enough to, you know, make me feel comfortable. And one other thing, David, the guy who plays the drummer, he was actually a friend of ours, and he is a phenomenal drummer too. And like, we wrote that specifically for him. After we figured out that we wanted the film to be kind of, you know, have this musical feel to it, we're like, David would be a perfect addition to the film, because not only is he a great actor, he's also like a great musician as well. We wouldn't have to fake anything with him or anything like that.
Funny enough, I called him when I had the script. I called him. I was like, "Oh, David, I have a role for you. How you doing?" But I had a bit of an issue with I guess circling his character into the story completely. He was a manager or whatever, but he didn't really had anything to do with the artistic aspect of the film, in a sense that he wasn't a part of a musical or painting aspect. And I called him up and told him that I have a role for him. And he's like, "Oh, me and my buddy, I picked up an old passion of mine, drumming, and we're rehearsing now." And I was like, it clicked. I was like, perfect, this is great. I'll call you later, but I'm gonna go and I need to write something. So it all worked out.
Well, I know we're out of time, so I'm so happy that all of these films worked out and that we're able to share them at our festival as well. Thank you all so much for joining us to talk about them today as well, and wish you all the best in the future.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.